Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Daniela Coleman. I'm the Director of Admissions and Recruiting here at SAIS Europe, and we're delighted to have you join us today. We also have participants joining us online, so that's why I have a microphone. I don't usually need a microphone to project, but I'm going to ask my colleagues, my faculty members, when they speak, to use the microphone so that our participants online can join us. We're delighted to have you with us for the day. This is the room where the majority of the day will transpire, apart from classroom visits. And so, oh, you can hear me? That's okay. So this is going to be a pretty interactive session. We are going to have a faculty panel this morning moderated by our director, Professor Plummer, and any professor of international economics, and he'll introduce our fellow faculty. We'll then have a chance for you to ask all your questions, but we're excited to have you with us today. It's going to be a long day, so if you do need to use the restrooms, it's on this floor, but we promise to feed you, and you'll have a great opportunity not only to meet with our faculty, but students, and hear from our career services and student life. So I'm delighted to have you, and I'm actually going to ask now Professor Plummer to kick off the morning session. Thank you very much.
Welcome everyone to a beautiful Bologna morning. I wish we could have arranged better weather for you. How many people are based here in Bologna? How many are based elsewhere in Italy? So I'm looking at the residual. You must be coming from somewhere else. How many are coming from the rest of Europe? Anybody from the United States? How about Uganda? Is anyone from Uganda? New Zealand. New Zealand. Anybody from New Zealand? Well, aren't you from New Zealand?
Yes.
There you go. See. Okay, great. Anyway, welcome everyone. And just to give you, I thought I'd just say a few words about SAIS before I open it up to my colleagues. SAIS aims to be the best professional graduate school in international relations in the world. Punto e basta. Okay? Our mission is to educate and to train future leaders in business, government, diplomacy, multilateral institutions, NGOs, and to address 21st century global challenges. And let's face it, the challenges of the 21st century are all global, right? So I think that our mission is increasingly relevant despite some of the things we hear from some of our statespeople in the United States and elsewhere. SAIS accomplishes this mission with different types of programs, with 1- and 2-year programs. Our flagship MA degree is a two-year program, which can be done either with 2 years in Washington or 1 year in Bologna and 1 year in Washington. Obviously, the people on this panel would all agree that the latter approach is best, doing Bologna the year first, but of course it depends on your goals. But we really think that this is a very useful sort of combination of a year addressing global issues with mostly European faculty, and then doing a year in DC and doing it with US faculty. So that's been something we've been doing for a very long time. SAIS just celebrated 75 years, by the way. And as I'll mention in a few minutes, we're celebrating 65 years. So we've been doing this for a long time. I personally haven't been doing it for that long, but okay. We also have a 2-year MAIA degree that's based here in Bologna, which is a research-focused degree that allows for a bit more flexibility to students to choose the academic path that they would like to follow. And that program is also, obtainable in 1 year here in Bologna through one of our collaborative programs. So some of you may be aware that we have a relationship with the University of Bologna and several other universities, in which case one does the first year of the MAIA at that institution and the second year here. Okay. We also have 1-year degrees, both here and in Washington. The Master of International Public Policy is a degree that's offered in both places. That's a mid-career degree, and it doesn't look like a lot of you would be mid-career, but that's always one option. Here in Bologna, we have a Master of Global Risk, which is a one-year degree, and the academic director is to my right, Filippo Taddei. And we are launching a new Master of European Public Policy, one-year degree. That is as academic director, Michael Lee, who will be speaking also later. Also in Washington, D.C., there's a Master of International Economics and Finance, which is a very sort of econ finance intensive degree that's done in 12 months in Washington, D.C. So these are all the menu of degrees that we offer at SAIS, all with the same sort of general goal to educate leaders for the 21st century, to excel in international careers, giving you the tools that you need to do this, from languages to economics, from history to statistics, and from conflict negotiations to finance. We'll be hearing about a lot of these topics later from my colleagues, and I'm sure that you've spent some time on our website looking to see what we've offered, but please don't be shy in asking your questions. As you all know, fortune favors the bold. Okay. But before I hand the floor over to my colleagues, I just want to say a few words about Bologna. Some of you who live in Bologna know all of this, but Bologna is home to 90,000 students and hosts the oldest university in Europe, probably the oldest continually functioning university in the world. So it's a very much an academic town. It isn't really touristy. It's been able to maintain its character over all these years, and so it's a really great place to live with cultural openness, and of course the food is pretty good too here in Bologna. It's also, for students that are interested in international relations, it's also extremely well placed at the heart of Europe, but also at the heart of the Mediterranean. And it's very easy to access, North Africa, even Africa, the Middle East, as well as the rest of Europe from here. And so having that access is really important, and we try to take advantage of it. Students here at SAIS will go on 6 career treks to London and Geneva and elsewhere in Europe, doing study trips throughout Italy, through further east in Europe, and also elsewhere, depending on the year. And of course, there are internships that are offered here and that students do in the summer. So there's a lot of things that one can do here, and I want to emphasize, though, that it's an academic institution. The professors here are all focused on their research. We have 40 adjunct professors that we bring in from throughout Europe to add to our curriculum to teach courses here. We have a very strong resident faculty, and as you'll hear, also resident faculty in languages. And so we really pride ourselves on that research component, even though we are a professional school. So it's also a great community to be part of. We try to celebrate diversity here in all of its many forms, and literally in all of them. And so students, when they're here, they work in a very tight environment. They work together, study together, travel together. And so you get these links that are forged that last forever. And it's not just the cohort that you're here with. You also have this connection with our over 8,000 alumni throughout the world, who, after they study here for a year, we call them Bolognesi. I don't know if that's going to offend any of the Bolognesi here, but that's what they call themselves. And you're able to tap into that network. And that's very important from social point of view, from a career point of view. And it's something that is very important, attractive part of what we offer to our students. I mentioned that we have our 65th anniversary that's coming up. We have a lot of events that are being organized around it. We actually didn't open up in this building. We started in 1961. In 1955, it opened up at the University of Bologna, via Trombetti, and it was established through cooperation between the rector of the University of Bologna at the time, Felice Battaglia, Felice Battaglia, yeah.
Don't look at me, I
And-
wasn't there.
That's, yeah. And well, you grew up pretty close, so I figured. Uh, and Grove Haynes, who's the founder of what was called the Bologna Center at the time, and it sort of grew from there. So we've always had these very, very close links to the University of Bologna throughout time. And this year we're going to be having some major events. For example, we have an alumni weekend where we'll probably have 500 or 600 alumni will come back, and keynote address by Federica Mogherini, who may be known to some of you, who is the outgoing foreign minister of the European Union and former minister of finance, minister of foreign affairs here in Italy. So we'll be doing a lot of things going through time, and even if you're based here in Bologna, you're of course welcome to come and participate. So in any event, I just think that it's very important when you're here, even though you're not here very long, and some of you are here virtually, that you sort of take advantage of the presence of the faculty and the staff to answer any questions that you might have of any nature. And as much as possible, we'll try to answer them. We don't know, for example, who's going to win on December 12th in the UK, even though you might want to ask Professor Jones if he's got an inside story, or Professor Lee. But anything we can answer, we will. Okay, so let me hand over the mic to my colleagues. Everyone, if you could sort of summarize your remarks in 5 minutes. I mean, a true 5 minutes. Usually when you give a time limit to an academic, it's actually meaningless. But, hopefully we can keep it tight so that we can, open up the floor to any questions that the students may have, the students in front of us or those that are attending virtually. Okay, so without further ado, Filippo, do you want to kick us off?
So as you heard from Mike, we do our best here to channel in the best way the studies of international affairs broadly defined, and an essential component of that work has to do with one of the founding traits of our intellectual identity here. Across the School of International Affairs, we're possibly the one that emphasizes the most the importance of economics. Not because we believe that economics is the end of it, but rather the beginning, so that you must have a solid understanding of the fundamental incentives, the fundamental trade-off, if you want to dwell further into international affairs, whether you care about the future of energy, a specific region of the world. It boils down often to economics, some economic condition, economic constraint. Obviously, today I don't need to make a very strong motivation of why we live in a moment of very high economic volatility. That economic volatility it's condensed at two levels. One is fundamental, things are happening, and the other one is policy. Policy are far more volatile today than they have ever been in the recent past. And this volatility, this policy volatility is especially important because it involves the two dimensions that we focus on the most. One is trade policy, obviously, and the other one has to do with the benefit or the cost of financial integration. We should not give for granted the kind of world, the economy where we live in today. It's very special in historical perspective. This is possibly the area of most intense globalization from an economic point of view that we have ever had. There is actually a debate in economic, in the economic profession regarding whether this is the time or the end of the 19th century was the time. But irrespective of that, we are clearly living in economies that are far more dependent on one another. So now, having a solid understanding of that dependence, whether we're talking about trade, whether we're talking about finance, is essential to understand everything else. And that's actually what we try to do here. That's why, you can escape from a lot of things here at the school. You can escape from regions that you don't care about, topics you don't care about, but you cannot escape from economics because it's something, I'm sorry, this is something that you have to do if you join SAIS. But just because we believe in it, okay? Not, the school is built under an interdisciplinary premise, okay? So we believe in the value of connecting different analytical tools. But we also believe that one of these tools, the essential and necessary that you cannot escape from, is precisely economic. Okay, and the advantage, if you want, of being here in Bologna is that you can see, you can look at the perspective on the most important economic topic, think about trade policy or think about financial integration from two different point of views that are both experimenting, their policy innovation on two sides of the Atlantic. Obviously, the Eurozone is built on the premise that financial trade and financial integration is actually conducive to a lot of further advancement. And on the other side of the Atlantic, the current administration in the U.S. is playing very harshly with the role of trade policy. So being at a school where you can spend 1 year here and 1 year there, you clearly have a very privileged point of view in actually observing at this conversation from 2 points of view. Not because, some of the issues are interesting per se, are approached analytically in the same way, but the policy point of view is affected obviously by the place you are in, and we are in Europe, and our colleagues are in DC. In the Master in Global Risk, which is a 1-year master hosted here entirely here on the Bologna campus, we kind of leveraged another dimension of the intellectual identity of the school, which is combining the analysis of economic risk, strictly speaking, so the thing that people like Mike and I would be dealing with as economists, with political risk, okay? And trying to combine a program where students are asked not just to identify what happens at the fundamental level, but also in the economy, but also connect that with the political process first by conceptualizing the different risk factor in the political process. That's actually what Eric does in his course, then talking about political risk at a domestic level, then talking about political risk in the geopolitical level. Okay, but you see, if you look at the Master of Global Risk, really the idea there is to combine, to actually facilitate that interdisciplinary analysis that we believe it's so much of an important trait of your professional development at the school and most importantly after it. I don't know whether I stayed in the 5 minutes, but kind of worked.
Filippo, you were absolutely impeccable. And I think this is great that you're here to witness this. Right? I should have mentioned that, we sort of have kind of a close, intimate environment here. We're not used to introducing each other. So you have everybody's bios in front of you in your folders. But I should have said that Filippo is not only the academic director of the major degree, but also the director of the Bologna Institute for Policy Research, which essentially is our web page that sort of trumpets our faculty accomplishments and what's going on here in terms of our seminar series. We bring in every year. We have about at least 50 specialists that come in and academics that give talks on various topics. And so Filippo does that, as well as teaching a full load of economics, and you can tell he's still very young. So next to my right is Nina Hall, who's assistant professor of international relations.
Thank you. Welcome all. It's wonderful to see you, and I'm excited to hear your interests and questions and queries and what you're curious about studying here. So as Professor Plummer already mentioned, I'm the Assistant Professor of International Relations, and I'm going to speak briefly about studying global politics, which all of you will do in some shape or form, regardless of the program you take here, and specifically around international relations, given I'm the professor of that. So as you may be aware already, at SAIS you can specialize in a number of thematic areas. In addition to economics, you can take a number of different policy areas like energy and the environment, conflict management, international law, international organizations, strategic studies, global history. And these are all important thematic areas which I think are really critical to have an in-depth understanding of, in addition to what my colleagues will talk about in terms of languages and regional studies. I think one of the reasons to think about the thematic areas that SAIS offers a lot of depth in is that increasingly jobs are being people are being hired for professional jobs based on thematic expertise, whether it be on climate change, the climate negotiations just kicking off today, or conflict management, or a number of the others I've mentioned. And I want you to realize, if you're curious of any of those that I've mentioned today, that we have a real depth of expertise, both here in Bologna and in DC, on a number of areas, important areas in global policy. So here in Bologna, we have Professor Justin Frosini, who teaches international law, Professor Mancini and Professor Penincino, who are working on questions around international human rights law, multiculturalism and women's rights. So to give you a tangible example, in the Bologna Institute for Policy Research 10 days ago, we had a woman theologian from Lebanon talking about an Islamic, a feminist interpretation of the Quran. And so that was an event hosted by Professor Mancini, where students sitting in your position were hearing this extremely interesting conversation from a woman who works in Lebanon on these questions, and was also talking about the revolution, as she called it, that's currently happening in Lebanon. So that's one area. On energy and environment, we have people like Simone Tagliapetra, Marco Dell'Aquila, examining how do we tackle climate change, how do we reshape the global energy sector to be more environmentally sustainable. Students in March this year who are taking the ERE, the Energy, Resources and Environment major, will be going, some of them are going to the Maldives to understand how the Maldives, a small island state, is coping with climate change. And we'll be meeting a number of policy experts and to understand their situation there. Then conflict management, we have Rafael Del Sarto, who works on how do we foster peace in the Middle East, especially in Palestine and Israel, which is a question with ongoing relevance. So you get a sense that here is somewhere you can come and study a range of areas. We are in Europe, and there's a great depth of expertise on European studies, which I'm sure you'll hear from my fellow colleagues later. But I think you should also realize there's a lot of depth of expertise, both research and policy expertise on a number of other areas. I wanted to speak briefly to international relations as a discipline per se, partly because I'm the professor of that, and partly because I think it's a really interesting litmus test for seeing how both the practice and the scholarship and how SAIS is changing and how SAIS is keeping up with that. So a quick question, how many of you have studied international relations before? Okay, quite a few of you. And how many of you, sorry, those of you who are attending, I can't see your hands, attending via the virtually. And how many of you think international relations is principally about war and peace? Right, none of you, which is interesting, right? If you'd asked that question 50 years ago, the discipline of international relations would have been defined predominantly by studying matters of war and peace. And it was once equated with these big questions of how do you stop mostly European as well as North American powers going to war with each other. But today, the study of international relations as a whole is proliferated. So if you go to any of the major conferences, like the International Studies Association, which is one of the major international relations conferences with about, 8 to 10,000 academics all swarming in a Hilton hotel, you'd be surprised what you can learn about. You can learn about things like the moratorium on whaling, governance of the internet, how do we regulate big tech, the role of women in peacekeeping operations, the importance of emotions in decision-making. And I think what's exciting about coming to SAIS is that you can keep up with those current debates happening in the academic scholarship because the faculty are doing a lot of interesting research that aligns with those exact questions. And international relations as a whole has changed, not just the topics we study, but the actors. We look at a wider number of actors than just states. We look at NGOs, terrorist groups, social movements. And it's gotten really messy for international relations. It's no longer that you just look at what's happening in capital cities in Rome and London and Berlin, but you need to understand what's happening on the streets of Bologna, like the big protests that have gone viral in Italy. For those of you who are following the gatherings that are anti-Salvini, that started in Bologna, right? That's going all across Italy. So understanding the dynamics between what happens locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally is increasingly important. And I think a degree here at SAIS gives you that because of the depth of experience across different disciplines, but also at different levels. So to finish up, is SAIS keeping up with these changes? I mean, the short answer is yes. We've got a number of faculty, both here in Bologna and DC, who are tackling IR or international relations from a range of these new perspectives. To give you a couple of concrete examples, here in Bologna, I'm the contact person for international relations. I teach the international relations theories class, which is one of the core classes in the masters. And it's designed to tackle the key theories. For those of you who already studied IR, realism, liberalism, constructivism. But in addition to that, we have a class on green theory. How do international relations scholars, how are they thinking about the environment as an issue? How is it governed? We debate and examine non-Western approaches to international relations. Is IR too Eurocentric, too American-centric? What would it mean to be non-Western? Is that even a useful category? We talk about the power of networks, be it online or offline. And these are the sorts of questions, I think, if you come to SAIS, that there's plenty of opportunities, both in your classroom, both with your colleagues, either in the cafeteria downstairs or out in the streets of Bologna. You'll get a great chance to discuss and debate. So on that note, I want to welcome you all to SAIS. Feel free to come and talk to me after today's session or at the lunch. I'll also be there, and I'll hand over to whoever's next.
Okay, thanks. The MA curriculum is organized around concentrations. MA students do two different concentrations. One is the most popular, international economics. It's most popular because everyone has to do it in the MA program. And then students choose the other concentration. And these could be in policy areas, as Nina mentioned, or they could be in regional areas. And the one concentration that is based here in Bologna is European and Eurasian Studies. And Professor Eric Jones is the director of European and Eurasian Studies for all of SAIS, as well as professor of European Studies and International Political Economy. So, Eric.
Super, thanks a lot. I think I'm supposed to talk about regional studies in general, right? And the underlying philosophy of regional studies is if you want to know anything about anywhere, you got to start by learning something about somewhere, right? And if you're going to learn something about somewhere, that means basically you got to figure out what's going on in these places. You got to learn the languages. I know my colleague Sara Gelmetti is going to talk to you about that in a minute. But it's almost impossible to figure out what's going on in Italy if you don't speak Italian. So if you want to understand what's going on in Italy, you better start learning Italian. Fortunately, we got about 100,000 university students surrounding us right now that would love to speak to you in Italian. So if you don't speak Italian, then you just have to walk across the street and you'll be inundated with opportunities to exchange conversation. Now, having said that, the reason that we want you to study places like where real people live and do things is because real people are weird, right? And to give you an illustration, my friend Filippo Taddei is not weird, but he is an economist who worked as a policymaker here in Italy, right? And I think that as an economist who worked as a policymaker here in Italy, he would still have a hard time trying to figure out why this government might fall over the Fondo Salva Stati, right, which is the European stability mechanism. I mean, come on, give me a break. They're changing one tiny part of a treaty for an obscure institution somewhere in Europe. I'm not even sure where it's located, right? And I've got students who work there. So, so some obscure institution in Europe, and they're changing it in a way that may or may not have relevance to Italy, because if Italy gets in trouble at some point in the future, that might mean that this obscure institution might have something to say alongside another much less obscure institution where my colleague Michael Lee used to work, called the European Commission. So the ESM might have something to say alongside the European Commission about what a government has to do in order to get the money it needs to save itself, right? This just doesn't seem controversial, right? And yet, when you look at it, you go, okay, there's a real puzzle here. We've got to figure this out. Well, I wrote a blog post over the weekend that tried to explain what this was all about, and that tried to explain why the first thing that Paolo Gentiloni, as European Commissioner, had to do was give an interview to Corriere della Sera to say, this is not an issue we should be fighting about, right? Unfortunately, that argument fell on deaf ears, right? So the government is still fighting about it. And that's the kind of puzzle we want you to be able to understand. Now, these are real puzzles, and they're really interesting, and they exist everywhere. So we have area studies that focus on Africa, on the Middle East, on Latin America. And what that means is that you not only get to learn the languages of the region, but you also get the opportunity to go and work there. Now, what I should say is that if you do area studies, this is not a blood pact that you're going to have to stay in that region for the rest of your life, right? Because, like I said, if you want to learn anything about anywhere, you start by learning something about somewhere. But once you've learned something about somewhere, then you can learn anything about anywhere, right? And that means that if you master one region of the world, you can go and learn about another region of the world. So the deputy governor of the Reserve Bank of South Africa is one of my old PhD students, right, who wrote a brilliant doctoral dissertation on the French economy, which perfectly enabled him to go to South Africa. And I don't know what he does down there, but it's really complicated. Right? And so in that sense, right, you could pretty much go anywhere. I had two PhD students, two of them that ended up working for the government of the United Arab Emirates, right? One of them doing foreign policy and the other setting up a diplomatic academy, right? And now they know everything about the Middle East. They learned Arabic and they did all that other stuff, but they started out in European studies. And indeed, you can start out in Chinese studies. The only language that we don't offer, and I'm not trying to step on Sarah's toes here, is Chinese. But maybe we do, so I'm not going to say that. So, so the point I want to make is we have real depth in China studies, right? We don't teach so much about China here because we've got a whole program in China where we do that. And we have a relationships that if you're like really bit by the China bug, you can do a year here and a year in China and get an MA, right? Or you can start in China, do a year there, do a year here and get an MA. You have to speak Chinese, right? Because if you go to China, you're going to study in Chinese and you're going to write your thesis in Chinese, which is not what we do here. We never write in Chinese here in Bologna. And so in that sense, right, we have this area studies tradition that we try to connect up everywhere. Now, last thing I'd like to say, one of the things that Nina said that I think is really important is that it's not just the resident faculty that you're going to meet, right? And if you do area studies, what I should tell you is that the way we recruit our faculty is very different from any other university program in the world, right? Most university programs, when they want to build a school like ours, they go and harvest the best faculty they find from every other department in the university, right? Which sounds really impressive. We harvest the best faculty we can find from every university in Europe, right? And we fly them down. And that way, you not only get to study with them, learn from their perspective, but you also get to be connected to them, which means you have the opportunity to explore employment possibilities in all the countries from all the universities that we host adjunct faculty members, right? And that's a kind of diversity that you won't find in any other institution. And in the context of European studies, it makes it possible for you to study Europe in a way that's unbelievably captivating, right? That'll just draw you in. And I know from personal experience, I came here, I was supposed to go to law school. I had this place at Columbia Law School. I was just coming on a lark. I thought it would be fun to study in Italy. And I got bit by the bug and I never left. Well, I mean, I did. They made me leave for a little while, but then they let me come back again, right? And so that could happen. And I had a friend who built a room in my attic when we were living in Washington, D.C., a guy called Vincent Wagner. He's a German dude, and he just woke up one day and decided he wanted to do Latin American studies. So he taught himself how to speak Spanish, converted everything over, graduated with a degree in Latin American studies, and then worked as an investment banker in Spain, basically managing an asset portfolio across Latin America. So anything you want to do, you can do if you start here. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thanks, Eric. Next, Professor Michael Lee, who's senior adjunct professor in EES, as well as our new academic director for the Master of European Public Policy. And Michael has really a distinguished career, including being Director General at the European Commission. And so he went to the European Commission, then to SAIS. That's usually the progression professionally. So, Michael.
Thanks very much, Mike. Eric, I can tell you that the ESM is located in Luxembourg City, and therefore, if anyone wants to go and work for the ESM, SAIS is a great place to train, and I'm sure Sarah could help with German, French, Luxembourgish, and Portuguese, all of which would be extremely helpful in Luxembourg. Just kidding. Since I've been back in SAIS, which is a couple of years now, after leaving the European Commission and after spending some time in the think tank world, what I've tried to do, which I think in a way exemplifies what SAIS tries to do, is to bring together academic excellence with practical experience of how policy is made. And what I try and do with my students in teaching about the European Union is to share with them my own experience over the years in the institutions of the European Union. I worked in the Council of Ministers, I worked in the Commission, and giving them a sense from the inside of how these institutions work in practice, and bringing that together with the state of the art in terms of academic analyses of the subject. Just to give you a feel for it, in the course of this semester, just taking the class that I've been teaching about the future of the European Union, apart from the units that I've been teaching myself, I've had, as visitors, speaking to the students, the current Director General in charge of neighborhood policy and of enlargement. I've had the director who is in charge of relations with Ukraine, the Southern Caucasus, and Eastern Europe. We have, together with Nina Hall later this week as a visitor, the New Zealand ambassador to the European Union, who spent 4 years there and who's going to share with us his impressions after 4 years as an insider, seeing from a third country perspective how all of this works, and also talking with us about many of the current challenges facing Europe, Asia Pacific, and the world. So this gives you a sense of the approach. Students have an opportunity to ask questions, to meet formally and informally. And I've also put students who are writing papers on specific subjects in touch with people in the European institutions who they're able to interview for their projects. I've got one student, for example, who's extremely interested in artificial intelligence, and as part of a scenario building exercise on the futures of Europe, we're looking at some of the areas where the EU may develop its capacities in the future, and one is in regulating AI. But also there's the question, Europe is perhaps not really at the cutting edge on AI these days, so it's claimed to regulate the field. How is that going to work out? Anyway, that's the subject for her paper. And I was able to put her in touch with people in DG Digit, as it's called, in Brussels, dealing with information technology, who she interviewed for her project. So what I try to do then is to bring together academic analyses with sort of hands-on direct experience. That's even more going to be the case with the new degree that Professor Plummer mentioned, that I'm going to be director for, and where we're taking the first students, the first cohort of students next fall, the Masters for European Public Policy. That's going to be a 1-year degree rather than a 2-year degree. And par excellence, it's going to bring together academic work with professional skills training. And there will be units dealing with some of the skills that you need, first of all, to get started in a career in public service, in academia, working for the European institutions, other international organizations, public affairs consultancies, NGOs, journalism, whatever interests you, but somehow or other related to the European Union. And there we'll be dealing, amongst other things, with negotiating technique, scenario building exercises, straightforward skills like professional writing, how to draft memos of the sort that you need in almost any of these occupations. It is a skill in itself, which doesn't go without saying. Interview technique, which is something that I've made a bit of a speciality over the years. It really makes all the difference. You go into an interview, there are two people who are the finalists, who are both pretty much equal on paper. It's the one who's really prepared thoroughly for that interview, thought it through, who gets the job in the end. So I try to share some of those skills with students. And in the new degree program as well, we're going to have regular mentoring by alumni who are somehow related to the EU, and also an opportunity to have individual coaching to focus on some of the particular issues that you wish to develop further. So this is just to give you a little bit of a feel through my own experience as to our approach, but I think that goes beyond the courses that I'm teaching myself, and bringing together this good professional background and training that's going to help you with your careers with academic excellence is, I think, really the brand that SAIS is able to offer you.
Okay, thanks very much, Michael. And last but certainly not least, Sara Gelmetti, who is our director of the language program and also an instructor in Italian.
Grazie, Mike. Buongiorno, buongiorno, hello, and benvenuti. Welcome. So my colleagues were so nice that they've already said so much about the language program. So I'll try to be as short, as concise as possible, so there is time for follow-up questions. Well, I don't know if you've read it on our website. We mainly offer 7 languages: Arabic, French, German, Italian, Portuguese, Russian, Spanish, and then English at advanced level, which means English for academic writing. So thesis writing, paper writing, essays writing, and we've started to offer a pilot project in Chinese that nobody knows about, actually. So surprise, surprise. Well, it's actually a joint program with a partner institution in Bologna, the Confucius Institute. So it's a very small program for now. We're trying to understand what the interest in this kind of courses is. So, what can I say about the language program? First of all, I would like to follow up on something that my colleague, Professor Filippo Taddei, said when he said you cannot escape from econ when you're here at SAIS. Well, it's pretty much the same with languages. You cannot escape. I'm sorry to say that. But you'll actually enjoy our language classes. You cannot escape from the language requirement for obvious reason. I mean, there is an added value in speaking at least one foreign language when you find yourself out there in the international arena. So what is the good thing about this? The good thing about this is that 92% of our students are usually taking a language class, even though 1/3 of them, between 30 and 35%, depending on the years, actually passes the language proficiency exam already with the first session in September, either by testing out of the English proficiency exam, if you are a non-native English speaker, or by passing the proficiency exam in any of the other languages that we offer at SAIS. So why is that? Why we have more than 90% of our students taking a language class when more than 30% have already fulfilled the language requirement of the school? Because we have exceptionally clever students. Our students know actually that when they are applying for a job, when they are looking for a professional enhancement, having more than one foreign language is an added bonus on their CV. So we certainly don't claim to be that exceptional here at SAIS, but we do have in languages, of course in all the other subjects we are, but we do have something very special at SAIS in the language program as well, which is we offer language for specific purposes. Okay, this is something that you're not going to find anywhere else in not that many graduate schools. And this is why we like to believe that this is an exceptional opportunity for the students. Are you familiar with the concept of language for specific purposes? Have you ever studied language for specific purposes? No, okay. So what is language for specific purposes? In a way, the purpose that we're trying to fulfill is your purpose, your professional purpose. The big difference between our language program and any other language program that you're going to find out there is that starting from the intermediate levels, we abandon the regular textbook. You know, these textbooks that you usually, I'm sure you've all used at the beginner level, level 1 and 2. Starting from the intermediate levels, we abandon this kind of textbook and we integrate the content of SAIS. The content of international relations, econ, European studies, regional studies, we integrate this content in the target language in all of our classes. So I want to believe that this is why our language classes are so well liked and so well attended. First of all, our professor really put that extra effort to make the classes relevant. And second, our students find these classes particularly motivating. Why? Because if you're attending Professor Lee's class and then you come into my class like I did last spring, and in the Italian class at the advanced level, you find yourself engaged in a simulation about the European Union elections. And maybe you can exploit the same materials and the same kind of articles that you have been studying in Professor Lee's class, and you can apply those articles in the target language, in your French class, in your Spanish class, in your Italian class, Portuguese, you name it, even in Arabic and Russian, because we know all these things are interconnected. It is more interesting for you, it is more fun, not only for you, but also for us as instructors, because as language instructors, we always learn actually from your expertise. So it's called the task-based approach. Okay, this task-based approach, because you actually have to fulfill a task, be it a debate, be a simulation, be professional writing. We also do that in language classes. Following up on what Professor Lee said, we also do mock interviews in Italian, because I imagine all of you know that giving an interview in Italian is different from giving an interview in German, not only in terms of language, but also in the way in which you present yourself, in your body language, in the way you discuss certain topics. Do you talk about the salary? No, you don't. Do you pose a certain kind of questions? Do you relate to your background knowledge? There are so many things that vary from language to language. And I'm not talking about the grammar. Of course it does, it varies. I'm also talking about what we call pragmatic competences. And these pragmatic competences are what you need when you're going to apply for a job, when you're going to go for an interview, when you're going to write a professional application for a job opening, and things that we hope are going to be useful for you. So far, so good. The language program, we like to believe that it's an integrating part of all the school and all what our colleagues do. And I think that this is another sign of what really sets SAIS apart from the other schools. It's such an interdisciplinary program like I've never seen before. And I've never seen a language program so strictly connected, so seamlessly tied in the other subjects of the school. So this is, I hope, I went on for too long? No. Sorry.
Well, that's fine, but that's an excellent point. I mean, that is something that we pride ourselves on at SAIS, is that everything is in-house. When you learn economics, you don't learn it from the economics department elsewhere in the university. You learn it from our economists who are policy focused. The same is true for the language program. As Professor Jones said, when you come to Italy, you really do need to know Italian if you want to know what's going on. But if I could add something to that, that's a necessary but not a sufficient condition to know what's going on, because I happen to speak the language, but I have absolutely no idea what's going on in this country half the time. So anyway, hopefully if you come here, you can get a better idea from our eminent European scholars about what's going on in Italy. Anyway, why don't we open it up for questions? It would be useful if you could say your name and where you're from before asking the question. Thanks. Also from people who are remote.
Hi, my name is Michael. I'm from Germany, and I would have a question about language program. So I would be very interested in continue studying Chinese. So you mentioned there is a sort of pilot program in Chinese. But do you, so in that sense, do you also offer the language training for specific purposes in Chinese? So is this integrated into the sort of the SAIS curriculum?
For now, it's the very first year. Okay, so as I said, it's a pilot program with the Confucius Institute. So for now, we're offering level 1 and level 2 in Chinese, because it's usually for people who want to continue studying Chinese in the second year in Washington. Where they have the higher levels, and of course in that case it is integrated. It's also language for specific purposes. But of course, should we notice that there is more interest, we can certainly discuss the higher levels. The Confucius Institute offer higher levels of Chinese as well, intermediate and advanced.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I'm Julien. I'm French and German. And I also have a question for Mrs. Gilmighty.
Sure.
Is it possible to learn 2 languages, or don't you recommend it because of time reasons?
Yeah.
Is it something students do?
I get asked this question every year, so thank you for asking it. Julien is your name? Yeah, yes. You're French. Okay. Sure, it is certainly possible to study 2 languages within 2 years, not in the same semester. So within the same semester, you can take 1 language class, because that's Well, you're actually going to thank me for that by the time that you reach the midterm exams, because, for obvious time constraints, meaning that you have 4 courses plus 1 language course, and you have to take into account that this is a graduate school, so you have to do a certain part of the study. The study component is to be done at home. So that will take up a good part of your time. Then, that being said, we have quite a few students who took 2 languages here at SAIS, meaning what they did. They did the first language for 2 semesters, for example, and I give you just an example. But for example, if you are a student who already has a strong background in a Romance language, like Italian, like French, Spanish, or Portuguese, to learn Italian in Italy is not going to take you 2 full years. But if you take pre-term in the summer, because we also offer pre-term language courses, if you take Italian pre-term in the summer and then 2 semesters of Italian, a good deal of our students reach Italian by the end of a first year in Italy. So what they do, second year, they take another language. This is option number 1. Option number 2, you continue to study a language that you have already, maybe you have begun studying Portuguese, maybe you have begun studying Russian. So you start here already at an intermediate level, which means that you reach advanced level by the end of a first year, and then in the second year you can take another language. Instead, if you want to learn a language from scratch, from 0, and you want to reach the minimum proficiency level, we recommend to keep on going and continue studying the same language for 4 semesters. Why is that? Because if I begin to study a language like German, Russian, Arabic, or any other language for what matters, from scratch, without any previous exposure to the language, if I want to reach the professional level that is required, for a job opening at the European Union, in the European Commission, where you are required at least a B2 level, okay, SAIS guarantees that you're going to reach the B2 level, minimum proficiency requirement, if you attend successfully 4 consecutive semesters of language studies. Okay.
Thank you.
We have a question online, so if you could just pass the microphone to Alina, please.
We have a question from Zoya. I'm interested in the MAIA program and was wondering if I could hear more about how exactly the MAIA can be customized for research and how much research guidance is given from faculty and what the process looks like.
I just saw John out there, but he sort of left. But I think that Filippo could take a stab at that. And then John, when he comes back, maybe could add something.
So the MAIA offers the opportunity to enrich the curriculum here at SAIS through some independent, supervised, but independent, autonomous research effort, okay? So the writing of a thesis in order to focus on a topic that is in the interest of your professional development, focusing on a region, studying a specific feature of that region or a market or something that is within your interest. And the benefit there of the MAIA is precisely the duration. Typically, the time here is very intense. You have a lot of you have a lot of commitment on your time. The courses, the languages. That's why Sarah, already mentioned how difficult it is to take 2 languages. So the MAIA gives you the possibility through an extended time to actually enrich and deepen your understanding of a specific subject and connect it to the work that you do in class. Always remember that you learn as much in class from your instructor as you learn from your classmates, but then there is a part of or a dimension of your learning that goes through, that is individual, the individual digestion of the topic and the individual elaboration of those. And that is typically something that you can do through the writing of an extended thesis, which is not just a paper, but is actually some independent work under close supervision where you're asked to put to work the intellectual tools that you've acquired through your coursework.
Hello, my name is Laura from Valencia, and I have a question between the Master in European Public Policy and Master of Arts. it's super concrete. I want to work in the Commission, in the European External Action Service, and I plan to do the Master of Arts with major in European Studies and minor in Chinese Studies. But then I heard about the other master, and I was wondering, is it possible to kind of combine both of them and convalidate European Studies or...
So you're asking a really good question. And when we designed the Masters for European Public Policy, we designed it to complement, right, and not replace the Masters in European Studies, right? So the Masters of Arts with the concentration in European and Eurasian Studies. So what we do that's different in the Masters of Arts from what we do in the Masters in European Public Policy is we focus a lot more on the national experience. So we try to teach people about, as I was saying, real places, right? As opposed to institutions and policymaking per se. We have 2 years, so we try to get people to study diplomatic history from pointy sticks to nuclear weapons. And then we get people to study comparative political economy, not just in Western Europe, but also in Central and Eastern Europe, including Russia. And then we look at Europe's relations with the outside world, but not just in the sense of what the EEAS does, but also what the national governments do and what NATO does and all these other organizations. So that's a much broader curriculum and less focused on the professional element that the MEPP does. Having said that, if you're a SAIS student, right, you're not excluded from courses that we offer. So everyone has the opportunity to do courses. And critically, the way the European and Eurasian Studies program is designed, we're designed with very specific learning objectives in mind. So you have to take a battery of comprehensive exams to demonstrate your achievement of those objectives. But how you achieve those objectives, that's very much up to you. You can do it through self-study, you can do it through course selection, you can do it through any number of different ways. I even had one student who did not take a single European and Eurasian Studies course, but she successfully passed these 3 4-hour exams, right? That was pretty cool. I'd never seen that before, right? And that allowed her to achieve the concentration, but to do other things as well. Now, I wouldn't recommend that as a strategy, but it does show the flexibility that we offer in the structural dimension, and I'll let Professor Lee tell you more about what the MEPP has that's different.
Thanks, Eric. So as Professor Jones said, you wouldn't be barred from taking courses that are offered in the MEPP if you were doing the 2 years master's. I must say, provided there's room, as in all cases, because we don't like the classes to be too crowded. That said, the 2 main differences would be, first of all, that the MEPP is a 1-year degree, and secondly, that it will have a greater concentration on professional skills. And simply because of my own background and my focus, a lot of that will be with respect to the European Union, but not only. Also, people who are interested in careers in national diplomatic services or other careers will also be considering them too. There is an element of professional preparation also in the 2-year masters. So that is present in that degree, but it will be in a more concentrated form in the MEPP.
Thanks. Michael? Yes.
Hi, my name is Alice, I'm from Milano, and I have 2 questions. One, what is the difference between the Master of Arts and the Maya? Because you stressed the fact that the Maya is a very research-based master degree, so I was wondering if the Master of Arts is more professionally oriented or if it also has a big research component. And then second question, I wanted to ask some more information about the cooperative degree programs. How do they work? Do all the courses, or are only some courses involved? Yeah, just some more information. Thanks.
Okay, why don't we, let me introduce Professor John Piper. Let me introduce Professor John Harper, who is the Kenneth H. Keller Professor of American Foreign Policy, and he can sort of talk a bit about the MAIA and MA program and either continue to talk about the cooperatives or I can do that.
Thank you. Mike, your question was about the Maya degree, right?
The difference between the two, whether one is more research-based and the other one is more professional. And
that's correct. The Maya is a research-based degree. And you, what is your background, by the way?
I studied politics at PPLE, which is this interdisciplinary program in Amsterdam. So yeah, research bachelor.
Okay. Well, the Maya would mean you would come here for 2 years, perhaps, and do a thesis in the second year, instead of the conventional MA degree, where you would spend a year here and go to Washington in the second year. So it's a research for people who want to do a thesis, essentially. In the MA, there is no thesis, no. Each department, each concentration requires a so-called capstone, which may be a sort of mini thesis, usually a big paper, what we call in English a paper, an essay, but it's not a research-based degree, no. So the Maya degree is, and then in the Maya we have cooperation with various universities in Europe, where you can spend a year here and you can spend a year there. For example, in Leiden, where else? We have a strong relationship with, how many people here are from Forlì or Bologna? Anyone here from the Scienze Politiche? Okay, well, you people probably know how the system works. You do 1 year, you do 2 theses, one here and one in Bologna or Forlì. But as I said, we have programs of cooperation with Leiden, we have a new cooperation program with SOAS in London, which will be in operation next year. Is that correct? The School of Oriental and African Studies. Where else? Where are other? Vienna, the Diplomatic Academy in Vienna, where you do 1 year here and 1 year there. Sorry? And Sciences Po Lille, right? Sciences Po. We have a number of students who come from Lille and spend a year here, but you can also do the reverse. You could. Isn't that correct? You could spend.
If you do I don't know the microphone, but if you do depending on where you begin the degree. So, for example, for the students that are interested in studying at SOAS, it works both ways. So you could start a year at here at SAIS Europe and go to SOAS, or at SOAS and come here and get both degrees. For Sciences Po Lille, the majority of the students begin at Sciences Po Lille and then come to us because that's the way that you get the master's. And the same thing, obviously, if you start at the University of Bologna, you get the master's from us as well. And so we have some literature in your packets that goes into a lot of details, but the option for the Maya is either 2 years in Bologna or coming to us from a cooperative degree.
Other questions? Well, as you formulate additional ones, the term preterm was used a few times, and just so you know what that is, preterm is this month before the academic year starts. And we sort of make a distinction between preterm and what's required for a summer school for various programs. For example, preterm tends to be optional for students if they want to do microeconomics, and so they want to do a good intensive course on microeconomics between mid-August and mid-September. They can do that, and that counts as the microeconomics requirement for SAIS, and so they can hit the ground running when they start up the year. That's popular. It's also possible to do statistics at that point in time, which counts as a quantitative reasoning requirement in the MA degree. There's also, as was mentioned, intensive Italian and something called, and it's very intensive, and something called survival Italian, That is 3 hours a day, 3 days a week, I believe, right?
It's actually 5 days a week. That too survival, but it's only 2 hours per day. It can be combined with the econ classes. It's for students who want to take both econ and to have that sort of ground foundation of Italian, so that, as Professor Jones said, they can go out, walk the street, and interact with Italian students from Unibo. Yeah.
And for the major degree, the Master of Arts in Global Risk, and for the MEPP, for the one-year degrees, it's not optional. So we have cohort courses that you take when you're here in the summer. So. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Francesca, and I'm actually at the first year in international relations at Bologna University. So I'm thinking about doing the double degree, and I wanted to ask if there are some compulsory courses, like I heard about micro, macro, and maybe a language. So what kind of courses can we attend here if we do the double degree?
This is for me. You have to do micro and macro, and you have to show a proficiency. Correct me, Mike, if I'm wrong, in international monetary theory by taking a non-credit course. So you do have to do. Have you done macro and micro in Bologna? Okay, in that case, you could probably take a waiver exam so that you don't have to repeat it. But if you had not done the micro and macro, you would have to take it here. But there is the economics requirement for the MAIA is, I would say, it's not as, you have to do fewer courses. For the MA, it's a bigger component of your degree than it is for the MAIA. The MAIA is really a more flexible degree because you don't choose a concentration as you do in the MA. You can fashion your program to suit what your research interests are. You have a little more freedom to do that. But you have to write the thesis. The thesis, by the way, is about 20,000 words, so it's not a huge thesis. But it's a significant piece of original research. Sorry?
There's also the option of,
that's right. We've now introduced also in the M. It gets very complicated. I mean, you have to read this document, but you can. The MAIA now gives you a second option to take. Instead of doing the thesis, you can also take 16 courses and do. But you will have to do a short paper, essentially a term paper for one of the courses. So.
If I can just add to that, students from the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna and students from Unibo are required to do the thesis.
Yeah. So you would not have the option of doing this 16 courses. You would have to do a thesis. Here. You would do it here. One thesis, yeah. Is that correct? One thesis?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, in English, of course.
And if I can add something, may I, about the languages? You're a native Italian speaker, is that right? Yeah, so you will fulfill the MAIA requirement by passing the English proficiency exam. And then you can certainly take other language courses if you wish, but as a MAIA student and passing the language proficiency exam, the English proficiency exam, you will have fulfilled your requirement. Yeah.
Following on that, regarding the collaborative degree, are there specific programs that are in collaboration? Or, for example, if I decide to go to Lille, do I have to take international relations, or I can also take political science or public policy? Or, like, are there specific...
If you Well, I think you would have to take some, yeah, it would be Sciences Po Lille, so it would be the Department of Political Science, but that would include international relations. I'm not sure. I think Lille has a curriculum more or less like ours, but I'm not sure. But you couldn't do English literature or biology. You would have to do something in the field of political science. Yeah.
If I can just add to what Professor Harper said, so you actually are students already admitted into these programs. So if you want to come to us from Lille, you're already in we have a specific cooperative degree with the political science department. And so you're beginning your master's with them, then you apply to us. And if you're admitted, we recognize the credits of that first year at Lille. So you would be doing, the Lille program is predominantly in French. So you'd be a student in the Sciences Po graduate program already. And instead of doing 2 years with them, if you're admitted to us, we recognize the credits of that first year, and then you would come to us for the second year. Exactly. So we actually have students in the room that are from Sciences Po. They're in the program right now at Sciences Po. If they're admitted to us, instead of finishing their second year at Sciences Po, they actually come here for that second year.